So right now, a bunch of YouTubers are releasing these crazy statements in regards to Breath of the Wild versus Tears of the Kingdom. Like, oh, Breath of the Wild outsold Tears of the Kingdom this quarter. This is a completely unprecedented thing. Yeah, they're really trying to make it out that Breath of the Wild being popular is some kind of massive L against Tears of the Kingdom. That this proves that Tears of the Kingdom was a bomb, that no one likes it, that no one wants to play it, that everyone would rather play Breath of the Wild instead. When if you think about it for 2 seconds, the people who are buying Breath of the Wild now aren't the people who bought and played it when it first came out. It's been 6 years. People who grew up on the Nintendo Switch are finally old enough now to go out and buy Breath of the Wild, right? You have people who never got around to playing Breath of the Wild finally getting around to playing it, right? You have people who were tricked for the first couple of years into thinking Breath of the Wild was a bad game. Suddenly being told by gaming journos and YouTubers that actually Breath of the Wild was a masterpiece. Tears of the Kingdom is the bad one. I have always been kind of surprised that more people have not caught on to what actually is happening here, right? I have always been surprised that people have not dug up the old internet expression, the Zelda cycle, to describe the phenomenon that's currently happening in regards to Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild, right? Fanboys of Zelda always do this thing where they pretend that the last game in the series was a masterpiece and the new one is bad. Every single time this happens. This has been a phenomenon dating back to, at the very least, A Link to the Past. I would say even arguably, even Zelda 2, right? Let's discount all the good, positive aspects of these games. Let's discount, Zelda 2's uniqueness, or A Link to the Past's innovations, or Ocarina of Time's, revolutionary gameplay, or Majora's Mask's, deep and complex story, or Wind Waker's, expressive art style, and Twilight Princess's great combat system and fantastic dungeon design. Let's ignore all of that and just throw it all out the window and just sit here incessantly and try to convince ourselves that actually the last one was better. Every single time this happens. With Breath of the Wild, Breath of the Wild was so wildly successful and popular that it kind of broke the Zelda cycle, right? Skyward Sword was so hated when it came out that when Breath of the Wild came out, it was kind of difficult for these people to come back and pretend that actually, I always liked Skyward Sword more, right? You either liked both or you like Breath of the Wild more, in generally speaking. Obviously, I've been a big advocate for Skyward Sword, but, for the Breath of the Wild period, what they did instead was try to compare Breath of the Wild to other games, games like Horizon Zero Dawn and Metal Gear Solid 5 and stuff like that. Witcher 3, right? They tried very hard to do this thing where they made out like Nintendo couldn't compete with other open world games, when in reality, those other open world games couldn't compete with them. And I think 6 years later, seeing 7 years later now, actually, it has become apparent that not only was the industry incapable of competing with Breath of the Wild when it first came out, they still can't do it now. That's the thing about this. That's the reason why Tears of the Kingdom is such a terrifying thing to gaming journos and the industry at large, is that Nintendo was able to put out a sequel to one of their most successful games ever made that still has not been topped by anybody, and have it be extremely popular and successful. And so everybody has been working overtime for the past year to try and convince us that Tears of the Kingdom is a failure, that no one likes it, that no one enjoys it, that it's not very good, right? And obviously, this is something that's going to fall apart as the years go on, as general audiences play through Tears of the Kingdom and realize just how great it is. It's going to be a repeat of what happened with Majora's Mask, right? Because when Majora's Mask came out, everybody screamed about how it was disappointing and how Ocarina was better and how Nintendo just didn't know what they were doing, how they were falling off. Majora's Mask, I think, is the big point where a lot of hangers on, the fake fans like jumped off and went to PlayStation 2, right? Like Majora's Mask was just wildly hated when it first came out because of all the changes and how different it was, like how it wasn't like a straight up rehash of Ocarina. But over time, it started being popular to the point where like around 2008, like it became kind of obnoxious about how people like tended to say the game was like the best ever and stuff like that. Like it's not that good. But like again, there are real conversations to be had about like which Zelda game is better and which games didn't do things as well as others. But there's no denying, objectively speaking, that both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom are fantastic games, right? To me personally, I feel like which one you like more is mostly a matter of preference, honestly. Like to say that Tears of the Kingdom flopped and that like it somehow like destroyed what Breath of the Wild built up, or that Breath of the Wild is some like untouchable like masterpiece that like it's just a simple cope, right? It is a justification to try and stay negative about Nintendo, right? Like that's what all this is. What it all boils down to is that people feel the need to be overly critical of a children's video game company in order to make themselves feel mature and sophisticated, right? Like that's essentially what this all boils down to. And this is why we constantly see people aggressively pushing this idea that Breath of the Wild is far superior to Tears of the Kingdom, right? It's not because of like actually enjoying the game more, because I'm sure a lot of these people were critical of Breath of the Wild when it first came out. It's a matter of diminishing the new thing that Nintendo has released while like holding the old up to an impossible standard that, quite honestly, it didn't reach to begin with, right? Again, it's about like kind of promoting the stereotype that Nintendo is like past their prime and hasn't put out anything good in the past like 30 years, right? Like again, it's just a reflection of that mindset. Is that Nintendo doesn't innovate, they don't grow, they don't evolve with the times, and that really isn't true at all, right? Like the reality is, as someone who's played both Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild over the past year, quite a lot of both. You can tell if you actually are the kind of person who has played both that they are radically different games, right? I believe Tears of the Kingdom even runs on a different engine, if that's what I've been told is true. But like the reality is, like you have completely different like mechanics and abilities and powers. Like the story plays out differently. Like Tears of the Kingdom like makes a lot of major changes to what Breath of the Wild established, and that should be commended, right? The fact that Nintendo was able to create such a new, interesting, innovative game in the same setting as Breath of the Wild is remarkable. And it's not even the first time they've done this. You know, A Link Between Worlds did the same thing with A Link to the Past, right? Again, all the criticisms I have seen lobbied at Tears of the Kingdom over the past year have completely fallen flat. Like, to me, it couldn't be more obvious that the people who are actually buying and playing this game are completely over the moon about it and love it. And the people who are crying about it incessantly are just doing so because they're petulant man-children who can't really appreciate the artistry of what Nintendo is putting out, right? Like it's not just it's not just Zelda that gets slammed like this. You know, I'm seeing Super Mario Bros. Wonder get attacked. I saw WarioWare Move It get attacked. Like Princess Peach Showtime got attacked, right? All of these were objectively great games that people really, really enjoyed, but we're really supposed to like sit here and like take these YouTube man children seriously when they try and tell you that like Tears of the Kingdom is like a disaster of epic proportions. Like how exactly is Breath of the Wild selling more than Tears of the Kingdom an L for Nintendo? The people who are playing Breath of the Wild now for the first time in 2024 are going to go on to play Tears of the Kingdom later on in the future. Like how exactly is this an L for Nintendo? Nobody can explain this to me because it simply isn't, right? Like the narrative that that Nintendo can't put out anything new or interesting has been collapsing for a long time. And with Tears of the Kingdom, I think it's finally reaching its natural conclusion, where we're kind of seeing like the beginnings of the current crop of gaming YouTubers becoming more like the older crop. You know, the people who like worship and venerate like NES and Super Nintendo crap with no real like understanding of just how good like N64 Onward was, right? Like they are becoming people like Mike Matei, who will sit there and watch a Nintendo Direct and try to tell you that like everything in it is bad. You know, people who will like try and tell you that like Zelda isn't cool anymore, or that like everything's been casualized, and like everything was so much better when I was a kid. Like the YouTubers today are falling into the same trap, I think. I am very, very disappointed in seeing just how many people have like clung on to the narrative that Tears of the Kingdom was a disappointment over the past year. It has been like an appalling thing to see and witness, something that I've been deeply disgusted by, and it is something that is going to fall apart over the next several years. Like, I imagine by the time the next Zelda game comes out, the narrative will have collapsed completely, right? Like, suddenly people will have, like, looked back on Tears of the Kingdom very fondly, right? Again, this is typical Zelda cycle stuff. This is nothing new. This is nothing unique. This is, like, not a new phenomenon. This is the Zelda cycle. You absolutely should not put your nostalgia over the overall quality of the products you're examining.